I, 31-year-old male, have been in a relationship with my girlfriend, 34-year-old female, for 5 years. I love her, and most of the time our relationship is good. But lately, we've been arguing a lot. These arguments lead to major outbursts, and I always end up taking the blame. What bothers me most is that she makes things up, so I always have to take the blame in the end. Here are 2 recent examples. We were going to the zoo. When we arrived, she went to get her sunglasses from the car trunk and handed me a pair and the case to hold. But I didn't see another pair underneath, which fell to the ground. She got very angry and yelled at me in the middle of the street. I asked her to calm down and told her I didn't know there was a pair underneath. But she continued yelling in public, which made me angry, and I told her she was acting like a child and an idiot, and everyone could see us fighting. She then refused to go to the zoo, got back in the car, and wanted to go home. On the way back, she was silent and crying and ignoring me. Since then, she ignored me for 2 days despite my many efforts to talk. Eventually, after 2 days, she began to speak, but in a cold way. She demanded I apologize for calling her a child and an idiot, which I did. But she refused to apologize for yelling in public, believing it was normal to raise voices. She then blamed me for driving home without stopping the fight early, and accused me of not trying to discuss the situation for 2 days. She said since it was my fault that she got angry, I had to take the initiative to talk to her. When I told her I did try to talk to her multiple times, she said that wasn't true. After I gave multiple examples, she said, "Yeah, well, that's not the way you should be trying to talk to me." Another example. We were on a short sightseeing trip with my elderly parents, which made me very happy, as it was the first time in many years. During the day, my girlfriend wanted to get a drink from a shop further down the street. At a big intersection, we waited for the red light until she saw another light, still green further on, and wanted to run to that one. I suggested we wait because my parents aren't quick and don't want to run. Eventually, we crossed at our light and reached the shop, and we were ready to enter the shop. Suddenly, she didn't want to go to the shop anymore and walked on. I insisted multiple times that we go in, but she refused and said she didn't need it anymore, as she would take a drink during lunchtime an hour later. After that, her mood changed, and she was grumpy all day, being cold to me and my parents. Back at the hotel, she accused me of being mean to her. I told her she had been cold all day. She said she was upset because I told her to calm down at the red light, and because she couldn't go to the shop. She also claimed that I didn't insist on going to the shop, which I did. When I told her that I did, she said that's not what happened and accused me of lying. Eventually, to cool down the situation, I had to agree it was my fault, otherwise she would have acted miserable the whole trip. After arguments like these, she becomes very emotional and says that she's not feeling my love. I'm never doing nice things for her like she does for me, saying that she questions that I love her and that I will leave her in the future. I then have to explain by giving examples to prove it. Things settle down, but it hurts to hear that everything I feel and do for her is forgotten in such moments. Even when I tell her something isn't true, she sometimes insists until I start to doubt it myself. If I continue, she gets very angry. Does anyone know how I can fix this? Despite these conflicts, I love her very much. Now, for a few comments before the update. Comment 1. Someone who breaks down this much over dropped sunglasses does not sound right. This is a totally over-the-top reaction to both situations. I'm sorry, but she sounds like she has some emotional problems. If this is the life you want, then stay. If it's emotionally draining, find someone else. It's okay to move on. But you calling her names is pretty immature as well. Comment 2, you can't fix this. She needs therapy. A lot of therapy. There is no hope for a healthy, functional long-term relationship here because she is not healthy or functional. You can love her all you want, but you can't make this go away. She has to take responsibility and get help. Now, for the update. Hey everyone, thanks for reading. So, 3 months have passed since I last shared about the ongoing issues with my girlfriend. Things have been a bit of pretty tough, to say the least. Right after my last post, we had another argument. This time about something as trivial as where to eat dinner. She wanted sushi, and I suggested Italian because I knew a great place nearby. She got upset, saying I never consider her preferences. I tried to explain that I was just trying to suggest a place I thought we'd both enjoy, but she wasn't having it. We ended up not going out at all, and she gave me the silent treatment for the rest of the night. A couple of weeks later, we had a somewhat good period where things seemed to be improving. We went on a weekend trip to the mountains, and it was almost like old times. We laughed, talked, and even managed to have a few deep conversations without any arguments. I thought maybe we had turned a corner, but then I made a mistake that changed everything. We were at a friend's birthday party, and I had a bit too much to drink. I ended up talking to one of her friends about our relationship issues, thinking it was a private conversation. I didn't realize my girlfriend was within earshot. She overheard me saying that sometimes I felt like I was walking on eggshells around her. She confronted me right there at the party, and it turned into a huge scene. She accused me of betraying her trust and airing our dirty laundry in public. I tried to apologize and explain that I didn't mean for her to hear it, but she was too hurt to listen. The fallout from that night was severe. She moved out of our apartment for a week and stayed with a friend. During that time, she wouldn't answer my calls or texts. I was left alone, feeling like I had ruined everything. When she finally came back, she said she needed time to think about our relationship. She told me she felt humiliated and couldn't believe I would talk about our problems with someone else. I felt terrible and promised her it would never happen again, but the damage was done. Since then, things have been tense. We've had more arguments and they've been more intense. She's brought up the party incident multiple times, using it as an example of how I don't respect her. I've tried to make it up to her by being more attentive and doing little things to show I care, but it never seems to be enough. She's still distant and often accuses me of not loving her enough. One night, we had a particularly bad fight. She was upset because I had forgotten to pick up her favorite ice cream on my way home from work. She said it was just another example of how I don't think about her. I snapped and told her that I felt like nothing I did was ever good enough. She started crying and said she felt the same way. That's when she revealed something that shocked me. She told me that she had been feeling insecure in our relationship for a long time because of her past. She had been in a relationship before me where her partner constantly belittled her and made her feel worthless. She said she was afraid I would do the same, and that's why she reacted so strongly to everything. It was a moment of vulnerability that I hadn't seen from her before, and it made me realize that her behavior wasn't just about me. It was about her own fears and insecurities. I started to see things from her perspective and understood why she acted the way she did. But knowing this didn't make things easier. In fact, it made me feel more responsible for her happiness, which was a heavy burden to carry. I wanted to help her feel secure and loved, but I didn't know how to do that without losing myself in the process. We decided to try couples therapy, hoping it would help us communicate better and understand each other's needs. The first few sessions were tough. We both had to confront some uncomfortable truths about ourselves and our relationship. The therapist pointed out that we both had a tendency to avoid conflict until it exploded, which wasn't healthy. She also helped us see that we needed to work on building trust and understanding each other's triggers. One of the exercises the therapist gave us was to write letters to each other, expressing our feelings without fear of judgment. In my letter, I told her how much I loved her and how I wanted to make things work. I also admitted that I sometimes felt overwhelmed by her expectations and didn't know how to meet them. Her letter to me was heartbreaking. She wrote about her past relationship and how it had left her feeling unworthy of love. She said she was afraid I would leave her, just like her ex did. Reading her letter made me realize how deep her wounds were. It also made me see that I needed to be more patient and understanding. But it wasn't easy. There were still moments when I felt frustrated and helpless. I wanted to fix things, but I didn't know how. One day, while we were cleaning the apartment, I found an old photo album of hers. It was filled with pictures from her childhood and teenage years. As we looked through it together, she started sharing stories about her family and her past. She told me about her parents' divorce and how it had affected her. She also talked about her first love and how it had ended in betrayal. These stories gave me a deeper understanding of who she was and why she acted the way she did. But before I tell you more about that, there's something else you need to know. During one of our therapy sessions, the therapist suggested we take a break from each other to reflect on our relationship. It was a scary thought, but we agreed to try it. We spent 2 weeks apart, focusing on ourselves and what we wanted from the relationship. It was a difficult time, but it also gave us some much-needed perspective. When we finally came back together, We had a long talk about our future. We both admitted that we had a lot of work to do, but we were willing to try. We set some ground rules for our relationship, like being more open about our feelings and not letting small issues fester. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a start. So that's where we are now. We're still working on things, and it's not always easy, but we're trying to be more understanding and patient with each other. I've learned that relationships are complicated and require constant effort. I don't know what the future holds, but I'm hopeful that we can make it work. Thanks for reading. Aita, for confronting my partner about his inappropriate relationship with a teenage coworker. While I was pregnant, a 28-year-old female was 7 months pregnant when he, 29-year-old male, accepted the number of a girl, 18-year-old female, he had been working with for about a year. After almost 8 years of never having anyone's number, not even his best friend's number of 10 plus years. And she was the only one with a special text tone. Everyone else, including myself, just had the default ringtone. I told him I wasn't comfortable with it. He asked for a reason and I couldn't give him one because it was just a feeling. He brushed it under the rug, saying it was mostly for work because she covers his shift for him. I thought I might have been a little overdramatic because I was hormonal, so I let it go. But then he insisted on getting her a birthday present. I told him I didn't want him to. But if he did get her a gift, get like a gift card or something. He said that wasn't personal enough, so even though I practically begged him not to, he got her a necklace anyway. When he gave it to her, he asked her to take a picture and show him if she wears it. A few days later, he suddenly brought up open relationships, and if we ever started feeling distant, we should do that instead of breaking up. I was overwhelmed and started crying because I thought that was his way of saying he was interested in this girl. When I told him no, I wasn't interested in that, he got upset. Then, 2 days later, my water broke a month early. We were in the hospital for 2 weeks, and I found out he was texting her off and on the entire time. Then, he started spending time after work with her instead of coming home right after to help me with our newborn child. It was only for 20 minutes or so, but it was always just them alone, and they got off at midnight. Being upset, I tried to talk to our friends about it to see if I was being irrational. But he got angry and yelled at me, saying that I was accusing him of having an emotional affair, stormed out of the house and left. He did things that I thought were just special for us with her. Apparently, I was the only one that felt that way. I mentioned at one point she was pretty, and he used it as an opportunity to call her hot. I asked him if he deleted messages, and he told me no, and just to start deleting them soon after. He complained about me to her of all people, and purposely ignored me when I upset him and screenshotted our conversation and sent it to her and started talking about it. For months I cried and was heartbroken just for it to seem like he didn't care. Eventually he deleted her number, but it felt like it was because he got angry at me for crying all the time, instead of doing it because he valued me and how I felt. According to him, it's my fault that I got hurt by his friendship with her because I couldn't trust him and violated his privacy. To add, not that it makes it better, but she was 18 when she gave him her number, and she turned 19. He insists that they were just friends and nothing more. But if that's true, how is the friendship more important than the fact that I was being hurt by it? Now, for a few comments before the update. Comment 1. The fault is in no way with you, and you absolutely got cheated on, emotionally for sure. If not sexually, it is probably also intimacy. Comment 2. Why do you want to be with a man who is a disgusting creep anyway? The girl was 18 and your boyfriend is 29. He is literally a predator. Barf. Now, for the update. Hey everyone, thanks for sticking around. So, 2 weeks ago, things took a turn I didn't see coming. After he deleted her number, I thought maybe we could start to rebuild. But it wasn't that simple. He started coming home later and later, claiming he was working overtime. I didn't buy it, but I was too exhausted to argue. One night, I decided to check his phone while he was in the shower. I know, but I had to know. Turns out he had been using a different messaging app to keep in touch with her. They were still talking, and it wasn't just about work. They were sharing personal stuff, things he used to share with me. I confronted him, and he didn't deny it. Instead, he got defensive and said I was invading his privacy again. He packed a bag and left, saying he needed space. That was a week ago. Since then, he's been staying with a friend, but he comes by to see our baby. He acts like everything is normal, but it's not. I can see the guilt in his eyes, but he won't admit he did anything wrong. Meanwhile, I found out from a mutual friend that he had been talking about our relationship problems with her for months. This friend told me that he'd been considering leaving me even before I got pregnant. Apparently, he felt trapped and thought having a baby would fix things. I was devastated. How could he think bringing a child into this mess would solve anything? I decided to reach out to his best friend of 10 plus years, the one whose number he never saved. I needed to understand what was going on in his head. His friend told me that he had always been a bit of a commitment phobe, but he never thought he would go this far. He said that my partner had been feeling suffocated and was looking for an escape, but he didn't know how to talk to me about it. This was a side of him I had never seen, and it made me question everything. In the midst of all this, I had to take care of our newborn alone. It was overwhelming, but it also gave me time to think. I realized that I had been ignoring my own needs and feelings for too long. I had been so focused on making him happy that I forgot about myself. I decided to see a therapist to help me sort through my emotions. It was the best decision I could have made. The therapist helped me see that I deserved better and that it was okay to put myself first. During one of our sessions, I had a breakthrough. I remembered a conversation we had early in our relationship. He had told me about his parents' messy divorce and how it had affected him. He promised me that he would never put me through that kind of pain. It was clear now that he was repeating the same patterns he had witnessed as a child. He was pushing me away because he was afraid of getting hurt. I decided to confront him one last time. I told him that I knew about his fears and that I understood where he was coming from. I asked him if he was willing to work on our relationship or if he wanted to end it. He was silent for a long time before finally admitting that he didn't know what he wanted. He said he needed more time to figure things out. In the meantime, I had to deal with the fallout of his actions. Our friends were divided, some supporting me and others taking his side. It was hard to navigate, but I focused on my baby and my own healing. I started reconnecting with old friends and finding joy in small things. It wasn't easy, but I was slowly starting to feel like myself again. One day, out of the blue, he showed up at the house. He looked tired and worn out. He told me that he had ended things with her for good and that he wanted to try and make things work with us. He apologized for everything he had put me through and said he was willing to go to therapy with me. I was skeptical, but I agreed to give it a try. We started going to couples therapy, and it was very eventful of emotions. There were days when I felt hopeful and days when I wanted to give up. But we kept at it. During one of our sessions, he opened up about his childhood and how it had shaped his fears and insecurities. It was a turning point for us. I started to see him not as the man who had hurt me, but as someone who was deeply flawed and struggling. It didn't excuse his actions, but it helped me understand him better. As we worked through our issues, I also learned more about myself. I realized that I had been holding on to a fantasy of what our relationship should be, rather than accepting it for what it was. I had to let go of that fantasy and face the reality of our situation. It was painful, but it was also liberating. We still have a long way to go, and I don't know what the future holds. But for now, we're taking it one day at a time. We're learning to communicate better and to be more honest with each other. It's not perfect, but it's a start. Thanks for reading. Aita for dumping my boyfriend after he stayed in another woman's hotel room and got a DUI. My boyfriend, 32 years old, and I, 33 years old, have been together about 2.5 years at this point. I would say we had a pretty good relationship, good communication, with a lot of trust. However, he recently went out with an old female friend, whom I do not know, who was in town. They went out to dinner and drank, and then when he took her back to her hotel, they continued drinking. When he realized he couldn't drive home, she said he could stay in her room as it had 2 beds. He says they didn't have intimacy, but that she came over to his bed and they started kissing. And I'm not entirely sure what else. He frames it as she came onto him, and he eventually went to the other bed and felt so bad he didn't sleep the entire night. He said he told her that he didn't want to see her again, and he had somewhat of an emotional breakdown later that next day that led him to staying in a mental health hospital for almost a week. I learned all this by getting a call from him in a mental health clinic, and they sent him to this hospital. I don't think he realized he would be staying there for as long as he did. He said he had a drinking problem and was having suicidal thoughts, but didn't attempt anything. This was so much information to take in, and to be honest, a month later now I'm still having trouble processing it. I know he struggled with drinking in the past, but it felt like he had a better handle on it. I don't really drink, so I don't really see that side of him anymore, but I realize it's a complicated thing. Once I realized he was okay and not going to hurt himself, I started to process what happened more on my own. Even though I know he feels really bad and is taking steps to make better choices, stopping drinking, therapy, medication for depression, I'm having a hard time with the choices he made that night, even if drinking did influence them to an extent. Because we are still adults and he was still texting me that night, no, he did not inform me of staying at the hotel that night, and didn't seem too drunk to theoretically be able to get an Uber or ask me for a ride home even. It's hard because he's so remorseful and struggling that I found myself comforting him, even though I am also hurting. We've been taking time apart from each other as I asked for this to be able to process things. And I started going to therapy as well, as this has taken a huge toll on me. I know no one can tell me what to do, but I'm just curious what other people's thoughts are and how they would react to something like this. Or if you've been in a similar situation or have been able to move on from something of this nature. Part of me wants to forgive him and try to move forward, as I do care about him a lot and believe he made a mistake. But I am obviously hurt by his actions. I feel my trust has been broken, in addition to my concern for his mental health. It's just a delicate situation. It's hard to understand how I can move forward after all of this. Thanks for reading. Now, for a few comments before the update. Comment 1. So, not everyone shares the same values about these things, and you're finding out the hard way now. Personally, this would be a point of no return for me, as I simply see this as being extremely disrespectful towards someone I intend to spend my life with. I generally believe that these type of people will continue to test and push your boundaries because they know they've gotten away with it once and how to get away with it again. To me, it's a sign that they don't respect you enough, that the consequences of you leaving them isn't alarming enough to not go through with morally ambiguous situations. Good luck and hope you take care of yourself. Comment 2. Run, 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 run. He's not only a cheater, but mentally and emotionally unstable. This is not a guy who should be in a relationship with anyone, but a treating psychiatrist. He's manipulating you into feeling sorry for him because he betrayed you. Please don't buy, I went to her hotel room with only platonic motives. Please. He went there to have intimacy with her. And you know that's what happened, right? He's trickle-truthing you. He's bad for you and is harming your mental health. You can maybe try to be a friend later on, but you cannot be in a relationship with this guy. Now for the update. Hey everyone, thanks for sticking with me through all of this. A lot has happened since my last post. After my boyfriend got out of the mental health hospital, we decided to meet up and talk things through. We met at a quiet coffee shop, and it was the first time I had seen him since everything went down. He looked different, more fragile, but also more determined. He apologized again, and we talked about what happened that night in more detail. He admitted that he had been feeling lost and overwhelmed for a while, and that night was a breaking point for him. He said he was committed to making changes, but I could see the fear in his eyes. He was scared of losing me, and I was scared of losing myself in this mess. We decided to take things slow and see a couples therapist. Our first session was eye-opening. The therapist asked us to talk about our feelings and what we wanted from the relationship. I realized that I had been so focused on his needs and his recovery that I had neglected my own feelings. I told him that I needed time to rebuild my trust in him, and he agreed to give me that space. But then something happened that forced me to make a hard choice. A few days after our therapy session, I got a call from his sister. She was frantic and told me that he had been arrested for a DUI. He had been out with some friends, and despite his promises to stop drinking, he had gotten drunk and decided to drive home. My heart sank. I felt like all the progress we had made was shattered in an instant. I went to the police station to see him, and when I saw him behind bars, I felt a mix of anger, sadness, and disappointment. He looked at me with pleading eyes, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort him this time. I left the police station and went home to think. I knew I had to make a decision. I couldn't keep putting myself through this emotional roller coaster. I called my therapist and scheduled an emergency session. We talked about my feelings and what I wanted for my future. I realized that I needed to prioritize my own well-being, even if it meant making a painful decision. The next day, I went to see him again, this time with a clear mind. I told him that I couldn't continue the relationship. I explained that I needed to focus on my own healing, and that I couldn't keep putting myself in situations where I felt unsafe and uncertain. He broke down and begged me to reconsider, but I stood firm. It was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do, but I knew it was the right choice for me. The fallout from my decision was immediate. His family was upset with me, and some of our mutual friends took his side. I felt isolated and alone, but I knew I had to stay strong. I continued going to therapy and started focusing on my own goals and interests. I took up painting again, something I hadn't done in years, and it became a therapeutic outlet for me. During this time, I also reflected on my past relationships and realized that I had a pattern of putting others' needs before my own. I remembered a relationship I had in college where I stayed with someone who was emotionally hurtful because I thought I could fix him. It took me years to recover from that, and I realized that I had been falling into the same pattern with my now ex-boyfriend. This realization was a turning point for me. I knew I needed to break this cycle and start prioritizing my own well-being. I also thought about my childhood and how I had always been the caretaker in my family. My parents had a tumultuous relationship, and I often found myself mediating their fights and taking care of my younger siblings. This role had carried over into my adult relationships, and it was time for me to break free from it. I started setting boundaries with my family and focusing on my own needs. As I continued to work on myself, I began to feel a sense of empowerment and independence that I hadn't felt in a long time. I reconnected with old friends and started building a support network. I also began to see the positive changes in my life as a result of my decision. I felt more confident and in control of my own destiny. But before I wrap this up, there's something else I need to mention. A few weeks after our breakup, I got a message from his old female friend, the one he had kissed that night. She apologized for her role in everything and told me that she had no idea he was in a relationship. She said she had been dealing with her own issues and had reached out to him for support, not knowing the impact it would have on our relationship. Her message gave me some closure, but it also made me realize how important it is to communicate openly and honestly in a relationship. So, that's where things stand now. I'm focusing on my own healing and growth. And while it's been a difficult journey, I know I'm on the right path. Thanks for reading. If you like this video, you'll probably like these too. Also, while you're here, please consider subscribing. It's your support that keeps this channel alive and allows me to make better and longer videos. Have a great day.